Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, councillors and officers of the council and members of the public. There isn't any. Welcome to this meeting of the Constitutional Review Committee. A few housekeeping rules. Fire evacuation procedure. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs. Please do not use the lifts and assemble in Hawley Square on the green, where officers will assist you and advise you when it's deemed safe to return. Does anybody intend filming the meeting? No. There's no members of the public here, so that's all right. Restriction of use of mobile phones. Will everybody please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls in the chamber whilst the meeting is in progress. And please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public, except for items of any business or exempt or confidential information is considered following the exclusion of the press and the public from the meeting. Does any member wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1? Please announce it now. Good. Apologies for absence. We've got apologies from Councillors Everett and Gardner. Councillor Yates was supposed to be... Oh, Councillor Yates will be here in a minute. Are there any other apologies? No. Good. Are there any declarations of interest? I think it's appropriate for Councillor Yates and Councillor Scobie to be here when we move on to the next item because of the inclusion in the additional bit of the minutes. And I think it's only right they're here when we list it.
Okay.
So we just wait for them to get here. We're all set? Okay. We've held the meeting, just you both know that it's up to item 3 of the minutes of the previous meeting, because obviously there's a bit of importance to be put into the extra bits. And what we've looked at is the minutes of the last meeting. Councillor Austin raised a point that something was not included in the minutes. That has now been rectified by virtue of a councillor's note, but it's still not exactly as what is written in the minutes. So what is suggested, and I'd like a proposer to include it, is that the whole councillor's note be added to the bottom of minute 3 of the minutes meeting. Does anybody wish to make any comment? Councillor Pugh?
I'm very happy to propose that, Chair. And I think, apologies that I wasn't able to attend the meeting, but the inclusion of this within the minutes, I think, is a very positive step forward.
Thank you. Do we need a seconder? Seconded. So can I then take it that the minutes of the last meeting, to include the extra bit from the councillor's note, is a true record of the meeting? And could I have a proposer and seconder, please? Councillor Austin. Thank you. Right. Let's move on. Agenda item 4, amendments to the council procedure rules regarding the frequency of questions. I call upon Mr Hughes to introduce the document.
Thank you, Chair. So this report, the issue or the subject of this report is referred back to the Constitutional Review Constitutional Review Committee by full council. It went there at the tail end of last year. Members wanted the panel to have another think about the rules that have been suggested. So we've brought them back here. We've got the option, as was agreed at full council, which is the option that we would suggest, officers would suggest to be put into the Constitution, which is outlined at option 1 at paragraph 3.2. And this is designed so that it would prevent people submitting essentially the same question. Excuse me. The same question in a shorter period than 6 months. So essentially, currently, if a member of the public puts a question in, and it is word for word the same as a question that a councillor has put at the last council meeting, that would be valid, because the current rules are specific to councillors can't ask the same question that councillors have asked, and the public can't ask the same question that public. There's no crossover in that. So, so that was the first bit that we wanted to tweak here. And also, we wanted to add in about validly received or put. So, the reason for that is because, as it's outlined in the report, you could get a question that hasn't been asked, but you could get 6 people all put the same question in for the same meeting, which has happened, previously happened, funnily enough, at the same meeting where this was considered. You then have 6 people all asking the same question, and it naturally, at the meeting, it got to a point where people didn't want their question answered because the answer was exactly the same every time. And so people just got to the point, by the 3rd or 4th question, people were just like, yeah, just don't bother, please. It's a waste of everybody's time. So what we would put in there is to say, please make sure that it's been validly received. So if the first person who asks that question, they would be the person who gets to ask it at the meeting. We would then reject everybody else's question if it was exactly the same or virtually the same. And when we say virtually the same, we really do mean essentially asking exactly the same thing with a few variances of words. We're quite inclusive with questions, and certainly the Chief Executive is very inclusive of questions. It has to be something exceptionally unusual, or especially outside of the rules for him to reject a question. So that is the proposal in option 1. So we make sure that questions are validly received or put, and then also that if a question has come from a member or an officer, it doesn't matter which it's come from. If that has been asked in the last 6 months, we wouldn't allow it again for that 6-month period. Now, obviously, some people, some members at the council meeting expressed the fact that that was unsatisfactory, which is fair enough. So we've come up with an option 2, which sort of says, well, actually, let's look at it from the opposite end of that process. Well, let's not think about banning people or rejecting questions. Let's be inclusive and allow questions to come from the public, even if they are the same. But we would alter the way that the council answers them. So if you had 4 or 5 questions that were all exactly the same or very similar, we, instead of having 4 individual answers where you're repeating exactly the same thing to the members of the public, the cabinet member who's answering that would only have to give one answer. So that would reduce the amount of time needed to answer multiple questions, but still allow people to have their question accepted by the council. We'd also want to include a check with the Chief Executive to make sure that it's okay for a Cabinet member to amalgamate similar questions, because we wouldn't want occasion, not saying that this would happen, but you could get questions that were on similar, which could be argued that they were on the same subject, just so that people didn't have to answer them. So it would just be a advisable check with the Chief Executive to say, actually, yes, as somebody looking at it, I think those questions are similar enough to warrant a single answer going back. The only issue with this is that this would only really work with public questions. It wouldn't really work with member questions, or sorry, councillor questions, because if you combine the answers, you'd then end up with arguments about who would have the supplementary question, or you end up having everybody having a supplementary question, which is just a really messy sort of scenario. So we would, if members weren't happy with the first option, we would say, okay, let's amalgamate answers for members of the public, but we'd leave councillor questions as they were. So that's the two options, or obviously if there's anything else you want to change with regards to that, if there's a third option that you've thought of that we haven't, then obviously we're quite happy to hear that. So I'll open it to questions.
Anybody wish to raise any questions? Councillor Austin?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nick. It feels to me like there's a difference between councillor questions and members of the public questions from the point of view that if you were to come back to me and say, thanks for your question, but Councillor Bloggs has already asked that, I can talk to Councillor Bloggs about it, whereas with a member of the public, you can't say another member of the public has already asked that question, and presumably GDPR will not allow you to put them in touch with the other member of the public who's asked the question. So it feels to me like something that allows amalgamation might feel more respectful to members of the public, so they feel their voice is being heard, whereas with ourselves, we can talk amongst ourselves and maybe put a composite question or whatever. That it feels like we have more options, really. That would be my view.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, we wouldn't let another councillor know that a councillor has asked a specific question. Obviously, if you asked a question to full council, we would tell the Cabinet member that you've identified, because obviously they need to go away and think about the answer. But we wouldn't regularly go and tell Councillor so-and-so, oh, do you know that Councillor Austin has asked that? We would let you as councillors do that organically yourselves. Yeah.
Sorry, that wasn't what I meant. What I meant was if you came back to me and said there's already been a question asked on this subject, then I'm assuming that if I say to you, can you tell me which councillor has asked it, you would be able to tell me that, and I would be able to get in touch with that person or not?
I think we probably would if it had already been in the public domain. Yeah, I don't see any reason.
They wouldn't be by that point.
Yeah, no, but if it had been asked in the last 6 months and it had been answered in a public forum. But yeah, but so if that information was already in the public domain, then that could be reconfirmed. If it wasn't, I've got my GDPR expert sitting right next to me, actually, so you can confirm that what I'm saying is right. It is, isn't it? Yeah. But if it wasn't, then we wouldn't be able to.
So if I was just late presenting my question, as I always am, and somebody else had already got in for that meeting, then Nick would be able to say, I'm sorry, somebody else has asked that.
Exactly, but not at that stage reveal the identity. Thanks.
Councillor Crittenden?
Yeah, I think I probably don't like the first option. I think to backbenchers it feels like it's restrictive, and if a backbencher wants to ask a question broadly similar, almost identical to one that's already been asked by a member of the public and they're not allowed to, then you're denying them the supplementary question through that mechanism as well. So that's another aspect of the first option. So I don't like the first option. I think it does feel as though people are being denied. We can also just do all councillors email and say, who's asked this question?
Yeah, I was going to say.
But, so I think, yes, the second option does sound better. It does, the other thing I wanted to say was it does a little bit feel like we're trying to deal with something that's not actually a problem. It's happened twice in the 5 consecutive years I've been on this council that I can recall. Once where there were like half a dozen questions, I think last May on Manston, the first meeting on the new council, when there were at least half a dozen questions on Manston, and then the Walpole Bay incident. And I don't actually recall any other times where there have been more, maybe 2 or 3, but not like there was on both of those occasions. So does feel a little bit like, you know, something's cropped up a couple of times and hasn't done for such a long time before that we're trying to deal with something that's not a major problem. So on that basis, I'm still happier with the second option, and for the Cabinet member to be able to compensate their answer, and I think then they can include all of the different aspects of it. So that's, yeah, thank you.
Councillor Fellows.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on the point that Nick was saying about same questions being asked on the same night. So if a member of the public asks a question and then a councillor asks the same question, how are you going to choose who takes preference with their question? And if it's a councillor, can we have it written in there that a councillor will take preference if the same question is submitted? We do get the same questions. I think it was a local plan last time where we had several questions, and they were from councillors and from members of the public. So if we're going to limit the questions same on the same night, then we need to know who takes preference.
So is that under option 1?
Under any option, because you're saying if 7 members of the public ask the same question and a councillor asks the same question, whose question are you going to accept?
No.
Yeah, Nick, under option 1.
Yeah. I was going to, yeah, so under option 1, yeah, it would be whoever asked that question, whoever submitted the question first, whether that's a councillor or a member of the public. Yeah.
I presume you would notify the member of the public that the question's already been asked by a councillor and we dealt with at the council meeting, with whatever date the meeting is?
Yes, yeah, we would say, yeah, if a question's already been asked on that topic, it will be put to the meeting of X. Yeah.
Councillor Pugh?
Thank you. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm quite glad that Councillor Critton spoke before I did, because I think she said my point a lot better than I'm going to be able to. I think it's frustrating, you know, the instances that we've had recently where this has become an issue. I agree with Councillor Critton. I think they are relatively isolated and they're not something that come along a lot. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with option 1, similar to what Councillor Fellows has said and other people have mentioned, more so that it feels like, unintentional, I'll admit, a bit of a way of watering down the role of councillors, particularly if, you know, a member of the public asks a question. Of course, it's just one question and it's responded to by the Cabinet member, whereas as councillors we have a supplementary. And normally, I won't be the only one to think that normally sometimes the supplementary is a little bit punchier than your primary question, and it really gets into the nitty-gritty and the detail of what you want to ask. And I think that if we're then being overstepped because members of the public are submitting one question on the night, or they have in the last 6 months, I think what that's going to do is probably restrict our ability to ask questions at full council, really. I do think it was quite comical when Councillor Everett and other Cabinet members had to stand up repeatedly and give the same answer over and over again, because we had 4 or 5 members of the public ask the same questions. And admittedly, there were, I think I was one councillor asked about Manston Airport. I think there was another councillor, I think it may have been Councillor Braidwood, that asked about Manston Airport as well in the same meeting. So it does get quite repetitive. But what I would say is it's very unusual for councillors. I'd like to think that we have a bit of common sense and we don't all try and submit almost 55 people submit the same question on the night. I'd be very surprised if we get more than 2 councillors asking a very similar question at a full council meeting. Whereas I think option 2, amalgamating those very similar questions, I think makes a lot more sense for members of the public, because then the Cabinet member could then stand up, give a detailed response, rather than just kind of be up down like a yo-yo, which becomes quite comical. And I think it then lengthens the meeting, particularly when if there's instances where, and Councillor Edwards was quite good at this as chair, where if we have time left over from members of the public questions, that then extends the amount of time we've got for questions from members of the council. And I think that is quite valuable, particularly when, you know, full council meetings are a little bit more spread out. So yeah, I would prefer option 2.
Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Chair. I think option 2 is the best option here, for a lot of the reasons already mentioned. I do think we could probably tighten it up very, very slightly, and that's around, it's not clear what the process is for telling those residents. You've asked a question, multiple people have asked the same question, and I think under that example, we should probably tell those residents you've had multiple people submit the same question, and then also change the existing rules, which it makes reference to say, well, we will read it out regardless of whether you come or not. Because if they've been told there's multiple people asking the same question, I think we should tell them multiple people so they don't all turn up, and free up their time as well, because we'll already have an answer ready, so we might as well change our rules to read it out on that night regardless if they want to turn up or not. Because multiple questions have been asked. Otherwise, it just seems like a lot of effort's gone into answer that question on the night, and we're not answering it on the night if none of them do turn up under that example. I don't know if that's something we can think about.
We could think about that. I think I would exercise caution about changing the rule that we currently have, because that's very much designed to stop people just putting questions in and then not turning up. But I totally take your point. I think we could probably add something in to this new rule around that as long as at least one of them turns up, then that's fine. If nobody turns up, then it would fall under the same rule. But because otherwise you don't want to sort of you want to break something that's currently okay.
I think my position was if none of them turn up, we still answer it publicly, because then we tell all of them, look, regardless if any of you turn up, because there have been multiple questions asked, we will answer it publicly. Otherwise, officers do all the work with the councillors to answer the question, and then it just disappears. And if multiple members of the public have asked that question, it seems fair to me anyway, that you could answer it regardless, but that's just my view.
Councillor Green.
Yeah, thank you. I start from the principle that we actually want the public to take an interest in what we're doing and to ask questions. And I think I got your original proposal right, that you're proposing to restrict the public asking questions that have already been asked by a member for 6 months. I don't think that's necessary at all. Things could have changed in 6 months, so I wouldn't put any restriction on the public asking questions.
Councillor Crittenden.
I just wanted to add something that I know Nick has said, but I haven't heard said in here tonight. It's not the questions that will be amalgamated, because the officers cannot do that. It is the answer, because that is the cabinet member or the leader that will do that. And I just wanted to say that because I haven't actually heard that said.
Councillor Austin.
I'd like to support what Councillor Yates said, in the sense of that if nobody turns up, but there have been several members of the public asking a question, it's of enough public interest to make it important that we answer that in public, and that people who are watching it on YouTube or whatever can see that we're answering it in public. Where I might want to differ from Councillor Yates is picking up on Councillor Green's point, that if we're responding to somebody saying, this question's already been asked, but the Cabinet member will attempt to respond to all the questions on this subject in his or her answer, we should be encouraging the person to come along, because we want to encourage more interaction with the public and more people to attend council meetings and take an interest.
Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm sort of on the fence. I think I'm almost in a option 1.5 sort of place, because I think if you step back, the reason this is important is because the time allowed for questions is time limited, and the reason that's important is because council meetings are time limited, and the only thing worse, I think, than having a meeting go on too late is having to come back and finishing it, either the next day or afterwards. That's something we absolutely want to avoid. So I think option 2 makes sense for members of the public, that it is an answer is given that covers the concerns. And I don't think you should be setting up the constitution of an organisation to allow for something to happen that could, in my view, be against the spirit of what we're trying to do here. Multiple people asking the same question and being answered by one blanket response from the council, I think is entirely appropriate. People asking lots and lots of questions, meaning that other people other residents that might want to have an opportunity to ask a question, but it's time limited, that for me is anti-democratic. So that's the first point I'd say, that I support option 2 for members of the public. But I do have to say, I think there is an element of option 1 that we should incorporate into that, which is I do not think it is necessarily right for multiple councillors to ask questions. And it may not have happened, and it may be a small issue, but there is a scenario where councillors who believe passionately about courts all could just ask the same question, and again could block up the 30 minutes that should be allowed for debate from backbench councillors asking the same issue. So, my suggestion might be that we consider adopting option 2, but including the words validly received from option 1 in the section around members' questions. So the first person to submit a question on a topic, if it's broadly the same as the other future ones would get rejected. I think that would be a good balance, because going with what you said, Mr. Hughes, about the fact that the Chief Executive on this is broadly wanting to encourage debate, I think, Councillor Pugh, you asked the leader a question about Madison Airport, and somebody else asked a question about whether he had met with Tony Freudman. To me, that would be an example of both questions have to be asked. They might be about the same topic, but they're about different aspects of it. So we'd want to keep that. But if you literally had 3 or 4 councillors asking an identical question, that shouldn't be right. That should be rejected, because it removes the right of other people to have their questions answered. I mean, my personal view is we should get rid of the time limit on questions, because I think we should listen to people, members of the public and councillors. But as I said, that's quite challenging.
Councillor Pritchard.
Oh yes, thank you. Yeah, I was going to suggest the amalgamated, but what Councillor Yates said about the amalgamated answers, whether it should be, and actually reading them out even if none of the members of the public turn up, that I'd support that, but just for where you've got a lot of people asking. If literally one person is asking a question and they don't turn up, then I think that's fine to just email them a response. But if you've got half a dozen people asking a question and ultimately none of them turn up, that is enough for public interest that you should be actually reading out a response.
Yeah. Councillor Yates.
Yeah, Councillor Pugh actually made an interesting recommendation, which was with the discretion of the cabinet member. So rather than saying it in a rule, you could say the cabinet member who is due to respond has the discretion to answer it if none of the members of the public turn up where multiple questions have been asked on the same topic. That could be a good way forward, potentially.
Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, and just on that though, it just opens up the possibility that people who have no intention of attending can put questions in on topics, maybe with the support of members here, and actual members of the public who do intend to come along and talk about maybe a smaller issue, their bins or something on their road, don't get the opportunity. I think in setting this up, we should try and make it as engaging as possible. And I'm not sure opening up the possibility that people can ask questions and not attend but still get an answer, I'm not sure that would work or is necessarily wise.
Sorry. Funny enough, Ingrid and I were just discussing a similar point. The other bit about making sure that somebody turns up is that you actually make sure that person's real. Because if you're just going to then say, we'll read out the answers to questions irrespective of whether somebody turns up, all somebody needs to do is just send us an address that's in Thanet with their email, and that's what we accept as proof that they're here. Whereas, obviously, if somebody then actually turns up, you know that person is theoretically a real person, as opposed to just an anonymous email address somewhere out there in the ether.
Councillor Pugh.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'd like to agree. I understand what Councillor Scobie the Younger, I'm going to call you, is saying about multiple questions from councillors, and I do appreciate that point. I do partially accept that. I think if that was something that we were going to move forward with, I'd like there to be clarity within the rules. Because of course, you know, the chief executive at the moment is very good and very willing to accept questions. But I just think we need to make sure that, you know, if there is something that is very important to all councillors in the chamber, just because one councillor submitted a partially similar question, I think as Councillor Scobie said, it's not about stopping them being similar questions on the same topic. But if they are actually the same question, then I would support. You know, a limit or only one councillor being allowed to ask the question. That councillor who submitted the question first would make complete sense. But I just want to make absolutely sure that we're not restricting the topic. It is actually the substance of the question. And just to go back to what Councillor Yates has said, yes, I did suggest that it could be the cabinet member's discretion to decide whether to answer the question if we've received 5 questions of the same question from members of the public. And the answer has been amalgamated into one, and then these members of the public don't turn up. I completely concede your point, Nick, about, you know, we need to encourage members of the public who submit questions to attend. I think that's completely the right thing to do. All I would say is that it's, you know, and Councillor Yates is right, a lot of officer time or work goes into preparing answers. And I found it as a cabinet member before, you know, a bit disappointing when we have these questions submitted and then the member of the public doesn't turn up, and then yes, okay, they get shared on the website, on our website. But actually, if we're being honest with ourselves, how many members of the public actually then bother to go onto the website and read the answers? Whereas I think in a recorded meeting, you know, video recording, it's a lot more likely that somebody may go back and watch it back.
Councillor Crittenden.
Yeah, could I just make a suggestion? It was said earlier we could write to people and say more than one person has asked this question, you will get an amalgamated answer, and there is the possibility that they will not turn up as a result. If all of them read, say 6 people read that and go, oh well, I don't need to turn up, then we'll end up with 6 people not coming. Could we have a standard wording that says if there are multiple questions that are broadly similar, you may receive an amalgamated answer, and then you don't actually need to then separately write out afterwards. I'm getting a shake of the head. It's like as part of the initial information for people asking questions. So it could be wherever it goes on the website or whatever, and then you don't need to specifically write out and go, 4 people have asked the same question, because actually that might encourage more people to turn up because they don't realise that it's a multiple question, but the rider is on the thing, you may get an amalgamated answer. That's a thought of dealing with it.
Yep, quite have to take that on board.
The only observation I've got to make, unless anybody else has got any comment, in view of the comments that have been made, does this need to go back to yourself as the author to add, to tighten up what has been suggested and said before we take any sort of vote proposals on it?
It really depends what members want to propose, I suppose. As I say, if
Well,
people
that's
want
right,
to, if people want to propose a flat option 2, then probably not. If people want to tweak things, then maybe, but it depends by how long or by how much people tweak it. So I'll answer that in 5-10 minutes' time.
Councillor Yates.
Yeah, just to speed things up then, I'd propose option 2, but with a small amendment that the cabinet member can decide whether to read out a question if member of the public, if none of the multiple questioners turn up. As simple as that, really.
Councillor Crittenden.
Well, I was actually just going to say I'm happy with option 2 as it is, but yeah.
Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, I don't think I'd agree to that amendment. I mean, obviously we'll vote on it. It's a valid motion, but I think people need to be turning up to these meetings, and I think setting a precedent where people can submit questions with no intention of attending, I think could be quite risky. There's lots of campaigning groups in Thanet. If there's a loophole, it can be used. This may seem like a small thing, but politicians and people like us try and use every loophole to try and get issues on the agenda. And I think we've all been through times when there has been quite a risky topic on discussion, and people will go through the rule book and try and find ways to get it on the agenda. This is one of the only places where a member of the public and backbench councillors can do so at a full council meeting, so we need to be very careful about what we're opening that up to.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pugh, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, just very quick. Councillor Scobie, I get your point. I mean, I think if this doesn't work, then we can change it back, and probably change it back quicker than we've changed it at this meeting, or likewise, really. But I think let's give it a go. Let's give it a go and let's see what happens.
Councillor Fellows.
Can I just ask one quick question? So Councillor Scobie brought up about extending the 30-minute deadline. Obviously, that's something for a future meeting, but can we get that on an agenda somewhere? Because it does seem strange to me, between March and October, we have an AGM and one other meeting. So we are going to get a backlog of questions. You know, in the 30-minute, well, you know, come October, I mean, we don't have a meeting between next week and October. So I think we do need to extend that 30-minute rule.
We've got a work programming item coming up, so we can stick it on there at the appropriate time. That's fine.
We've got another appropriate one on as well, just about to come up as well. Can I first of all ask for a proposer for option 1?
No, we've got another proposal. So we've got.
No, that's
Councillor
option
Yates
2, isn't it?
Yeah, so Councillor Yates has proposed option 2 and Councillor Austin
Yeah.
has.
Do you not want to get rid of option 1 first?
No.
No,
We're just,
okay.
We're just.
Fine. In that case, first of all, can I have
Hang on.
Councillor Scobie?
Can I just ask what happens if we take this to full council and they disagree with it again? Is it going to come back? Because that for me is the risk. Like, if you add something on at the last minute, the officers haven't, and you know, I'm not quite in the let's see what happens sort of mentality on that. You know, this isn't a hill I'm going to die on. This isn't like a burning issue for me. But yeah. Every constitutional issue is. No, I do. What I am worried about is that there is a minor problem, I would say, that officers tried to fix, that went through CRWP and standards and then got rejected by council. And I wonder if by amending it the last minute, we're just opening it up that this is going to get knocked back by council, because people will raise some of the exact questions that we've just raised around how would that work in practice, and what about people randomly putting questions in and not attending. So we may well be back here in a few months discussing this again, because it's been kicked back by council, would be my worry.
Right. Councillor Yates, could you please give us what your formal amendment would be to option 2, please?
Okay. Contract management on the fly, once again, which as a former contract manager is... So do you want literally the clause that I'd be amending? Or do you want the general gist, which is if multiple questions are asked and none of those members of the public turn up, then the cabinet member answering that question at their discretion have the right to read it out, because full stop.
And I take it you're proposing that?
Yes, I think I have done already. Yeah.
Is there a seconder proposed? Second, Councillor Austin. All those in favour? Now, bearing in mind what we've got on the agenda coming, do we need a counted vote?
No, it's fine. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah.
That's-
Any abstentions?
I'm just going to ask that one. Give me a minute. And the abstentions? One abstention. In that case, the proposal's carried and it will go forward to full council. Thank you. Sorry?
Now we need to vote on the new substantive proposal.
That's what we've just done, isn't it? We voted for the amendment.
Now we need to agree the whole thing.
Right, okay, we'll do it that way. Can I then have a proposer for the new Councillor Crittenden and a seconder? Councillor Pugh. All those in favour of the new proposal with the amendment? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
That'd be that.
Those against? Any abstentions? One.
One and one.
Well, in that case, that motion is carried. That will go through to full council. Thank you. Right, agenda item 5. I think it's your turn again, Mr. Hughes.
Apologies. Right, so this report is regarding how the council minutes votes, essentially. So currently, as many members will know, in fact, what's just happened at that previous item where we've had a vote, obviously some members voted in favour, some voted against. When that's recorded in the current set of minutes, that will just simply say members agreed. It doesn't say 10 people voted for, 1 person voted against. What we've had a request to do is to include in those type of votes the number of councillors who voted for and against a motion. Now, currently the council's constitution is not explicitly clear as to what is defined as a recorded vote. Elements of, there are distinctly elements of recording the number of people who have voted either way, in some ways could be counted as a recorded vote, which would need to be asked for by members and agreed by the panel. Now, to make it explicitly clear that simply recording the number of votes for and against an item is not a recorded vote, by inserting that little sentence into the definition of recorded vote would clarify things, and so it would allow us as officers to include the number for and against without it being the need to call for a recorded vote. Does that make sense? Yeah. The only issue that we that we did foresee is on things like minutes, where we ask you to say, "Do members agree?" and everyone goes, "Yes, yes." That's very difficult to minute, in the sense of not everybody would have mumbled yes or no. So you can't just say, oh, well, it was unanimously agreed by the meeting. So we had a look at what other people in Kent do, and Folkestone and Hythe they record those I don't know what to call it, grunts of agreement, as saying by the affirmation of the meeting, which I think is it's a much politer and more formal way of saying than grunted. Yes. So for those type of votes, we would put in the minutes. It was agreed by the affirmation of the meeting. For all the other votes, we would put in members agreed, 5 voted for, 3 voted against. And then if members did want an actual recorded vote, that would be exactly the same as it is at the moment. That wouldn't be any different to the way that we would ask for one at the moment. And that would be the only time when you'd actually have individual names written in the minutes. I think that's...
Does anybody wish to raise it? Councillor Fellows?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can you just outline for me and maybe others, sometimes when you have a vote, you automatically go to a named recorded name vote, and sometimes you just go to recorded numbers. Can you just outline the criteria of which one which, and sometimes you vote on whether you want it recorded and sometimes we don't?
So there are certain votes that we have at full council that by law have to be a recorded vote. They are mainly introduced by the Local Government Finance Act. Can't remember the year. It was quite recent. But essentially they are votes on council tax and setting the budget. Essentially, they're the ones that the government at the time felt was so important that the public should know how their councillors have voted on those particular issues. But it's mainly just those two, so setting the council tax and the budget.
Councillor Crittenden?
Yeah, I was just wondering how big a problem it was on the basis of it ain't broke, why fix it?
We were asked to put this on the work programme, and we've put it on the work programme.
So how big a problem was it that got it on the agenda? That's what I was wondering.
I can't answer that question because it was not, we didn't put this on the agenda. It was a work programme item. We have written a report thus.
Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what is so I've got a couple of points. What is the protocol with people after a vote then saying, I would like my vote to be noted? Is that allowed in the rule book? It is. Okay, all right. Okay, and then latterly linked to this, most authorities elsewhere have electronic voting systems. Quite a few of these mics barely work. Is it on the agenda at all that we might be able to get electronic voting? Because then there's maybe a bit of a moot point because it will be on a screen, and then hopefully there should be a digital record of this. I mean, this may be a little bit, crazy talk, but
It's not crazy talk. No, we are currently putting a Star Chamber bid together as part of the budget process for 25-6. That is the one it is next year's, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, 25-26. Which will allow us to replace all the microphones and the camera equipment and bring us more up to date. That would allow us to have electronic voting. It would need to be another change of the Constitution. We would need to make it very clear that every vote would be a recorded vote. But absolutely, there are definitely councillors. Canterbury is a really good example. Every vote that they have is done electronically and is recorded in their minutes. It's built in. There's a very clever system within the ModGov system that we all use, and it automatically fills in who's voted for and who's voted against, and that then appears at the bottom of each item in the minutes. So it's entirely possible to do.
is that capital spend?
Yes, it would be, yes.
Sounds like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire asks the audience, doesn't it? Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chair. This proposal, I think, came originally from Councillor Garner, who can't be here tonight because he's chairing Broadstairs Town Council. But he asked me to keep an eye on this and to speak on his behalf if necessary. I think the concern came up in meetings like planning, where there are controversial issues obviously going on of great interest to members of the public, and where it was felt by him and some of the other members of the planning committee that it would be useful for members of the public to see in the minutes how many people had voted for and how many against. Not necessarily the names of those councillors, but how many people, how close the vote was, or that kind of a thing, would be a useful additional information for members of the public in areas of public concern. That was where it came from.
Councillor Green.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on something that Councillor Scobie said, and that is there is a downside to this, and that is the amount of time it takes to actually do the counting. If we were doing that at full council, it could take up precious time. I would suggest we don't do this until we've got electronic voting.
Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I was going to say I think the what they do in Folkestone about the affirmation of the meeting, I think that's a good idea. Just to, if we did go with the recording how many people voted. Secondly, the Canterbury and Folkestone are mentioned as the only ones with the numbers for and against. Are they the only ones that do electronic vote counting, or?
I'm not aware that Folkestone
KCC
are electronic, but yeah, KCC definitely do, and Canterbury definitely do. I'm not sure about whether electronic voting is more prevalent in other councils.
Okay, no, thank you. And just one last thing. I mean, is there the option of having a middle ground, as it were, and just, even if the exact numbers aren't recorded, we specify whether it was unanimous or not unanimous?
We do write where it is unanimous. It was unanimously agreed. Yeah, we do that.
Councillor Crittenden.
Yeah, I wanted to agree with what Councillor Green said, that I think we should defer this. And if we're going to be looking at electronic voting in the next council year, then we're setting something up now that's going to have to be reviewed and changed again. And ahead of that, I do have a couple of questions, because which I think is probably on for the next stage, would be if technically, effectively, every vote is a recorded vote, would that be publicised as a recorded vote with all of the names as a recorded vote would be, even though it's not legally required to be a recorded vote? Or would it just be numbers that are publicised? So I don't think you can answer that now, but I'm asking that for when you start thinking about the electronic voting.
I can answer that, which is, it depends what you want to change the constitution to. If you want it to say that, then that's what it will say. If you don't want to change it and have it as a just a numbers thing, you could do. Canterbury, I know, do publish the names of everybody who's voted, and there is a feature in ModGov, so you know where you have your councillor profile and it's got the number of your attendance and your declaration of interest. One of the options underneath is recorded votes, and it'll have a list of every single thing that you've ever voted on moving forwards, pro or against.
I think there are some votes, not very many, that can be contentious, and I'm a little concerned about targeting. We have a lot of very, very divided opinion among the public, and I'm just a little concerned about, there's a lot of social media bullying goes on, which is why we had the debate that Councillor Whitehead brought quite recently. And I think if it's, I think we need to think about it, that's all. I mean, it might be the right thing to do, it might not be, but I think that those are things that we need to take into consideration when that is written by you and brought back to us. That's a little bit concerned about that, because that does happen.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I understand where Councillor Crichton is coming from with that one. Might I suggest a different sort of compromise, which is that we go ahead with the changing of the Constitution to say that where numbers are recorded, this does not count as a recorded vote, and that we put in a facility whereby a member can call for a counted vote, rather than in the same way that they can call for a recorded vote in a particular circumstance, so that it wouldn't happen routinely, but that, so a member would be able to call for one. Yep. Would that be a possibility?
Yeah, we could put another paragraph under the recorded vote to say counted vote and have a very similar set of wording. It would be, I assume it would work on the similar principle where over half the people in the meeting would vote for a counted vote. It would be counted, yeah, we could do that if members were that way inclined, yeah.
It would seem a possible compromise in the meanwhile while you're putting in your Star Chamber bid, etc.
Councillor Pugh, did you?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I did. I mean, I'll be honest, I quite agree with Councillor Green's suggestion that we defer this until we have an electronic voting system. I think it's just quicker. I think it's better. I take the point about councillors being intimidated and stuff like that, but I think that actually everything that goes on in this chamber, I think for us to be fully transparent, I think residents deserve to know how we're voting. I think it happens. I'm not saying it happens in every other councils, but to make a kind of an indirect comparison, it happens in Parliament, it happens in a lot of legislatures around the world, and I think it's important because if we're voting a certain way, we've got to, as individual councillors, it's up to us to justify why we do it. Councillor Christian, I understand what you're saying. I understand it's not nice to be badgered and stuff like that by some very aggressive, intimidating members of the public. But again, I think particularly in this chamber, we're supposed to be. I'm not going to mention motions that shouldn't be here and should not be. That's not what this meeting's for. But we're supposed to be debating and voting on local issues, and we, whatever stance we take, position we take, we've got to justify them. And I think I think I would support that, is that we defer this until we have an electronic voting system. But then when we do, it's then noted not just the numbers, but which way members vote. And I'll be honest, I'm sure any member knows this, but if there's anything that is incredibly difficult for you to vote on, you know, maybe this isn't something that all councillors are told, but within our group, we've always been told that if you're not comfortable, you send apologies and you don't attend the meeting. Now, I'm not saying that's helpful. You don't want councillors to be intimidated to not attend, but you know, if anything, I think it's excuse me, I think it's really important that residents know how we vote. So yeah, I support Councillor Green's suggestion.
Councillor Yates.
I'm actually in pretty much agreement with a lot of people here, Councillor Green's motion, but my first thought when looking at this is great. I really support transparency, the Nolan principles. We should be as transparent as possible. This seems like a good way forward. But then going right into the detail reminds me about some very contentious meetings where we've been on the pink and we've had recorded votes on the pink, and what happens if those reports are leaked, because we have a history of leaking at council and certain members. So I think potentially a bit more work might need to go into it, but which is why I kind of support Councillor Green's suggestion about deferring this until there's a system in place, because I do kind of worry that, yeah, we do have that kind of history of leaks. But I don't know if you want to comment on that, Nick, because I think that's an interesting one as well.
All I was going to ask, Nick, is there any sort of timescale for the electric voting system to be installed? And
I shall politically skillfully answer your question by not answering the previous question. The Star Chamber bid would be for the 25-26 financial year. So we would get the money, April of 25. So yeah, I mean, I think, as I say, if it was, to be fair, I think if it was agreed as part of the Star Chamber and we knew that it was agreed as part of the budget come sort of January, February time, there's no reason why you couldn't start the procurement process then. So you could hopefully get something in, I'm holding my hostage to fortune here, but sort of a April to May next year. But obviously it depends what happens at Star Chamber. Hint, hint.
I was just concerned about the timescale and how long this was going to drag on, whereas if we've got a rough idea of when that could be coming in, that might just ease people's pains. Councillor Crittenden.
4 of us have said the same thing on the back of what Councillor Green said. Can I make that a proposal and ask someone to second it, that we defer this decision until we look at the electronic voting?
So the proposal is that we defer this item until the Star Chamber budget is agreed. We've had a proposer. Can we have those in favour? Yes, certainly.
I mean, I did have my hand up for quite a while, Chair. I don't know if it's the sun, maybe. Two things. I do think that point around agreed by the affirmation of the meeting makes total sense, but it's a minor change and it can wait if needs be. I do think and I completely agree with the principle of pushing this back. There's no point in making a change if we're not quite sure how it's going to work in practice. But maybe we should suggest as a committee to council that under the principles of us wanting to encourage greater sort of transparency, that we would ideally like when budgets allow for the council to commit to moving to electronic voting, because I think a lot of the problems we're talking about here about issues to do with people at meetings not having their records sort of being completely covered, or not having transparency of what people voted on, would be covered by electronic voting. I mean, it's a system that's available, it's working elsewhere. And one final point to add, to actually echo what Councillor Pugh said, I think having a record of people's votes at meetings is important, not just to hold people to account, but to stop other people from mistakenly claiming that they didn't vote a certain way. And having stood as a candidate last year against somebody who claimed they didn't vote for certain things, and they clearly did because it was minuted but not named, that can be quite frustrating. So it's important, I think, for people to be held to account for how they voted.
Councillor Austin.
I realise we have a proposal on the table, but I just wanted to point out that all of this discussion, or the bulk of it, is about recorded votes. It's about naming who has voted in which way, and the original proposal was just about numbers. It was just about getting a flavour of how close a vote was. And so my suggestion that in the interim, while the Star Chamber bid is going in, we should allow members to have the facility to call for a vote where the numbers were counted but not the names, seems to me to be a process towards that, a way of moving towards that and trying that out where it is appropriate. So I just wanted to mention that again, because it seems to have got lost in a discussion about how we need to be accountable and records need to be kept about how we vote. I agree with that, but that's not actually the subject that we were supposed to be discussing.
That we carry on in
Well,
the interim.
I've previously said that would be, there's no reason why that couldn't happen, but that's for members to decide whether or not they want to do that or not.
Sorry, thank you. I think I appreciate Councillor Austin's point. I'm a bit worried that we're going to go round and round a little bit. So I just have a couple of questions specifically about what Councillor Austin has stated, in that if we were, hypothetically, to somebody who's put forward a recommendation or whatever to move to, in the interim, we minute the votes either way, for or against or abstentions for individual agenda items. Can we just confirm what the procedure would be to agree that? Because at the moment, to agree a recorded vote, it's a show of hands across the whole chamber. You know, it's very arduous. We kind of keep going and going, you know, stuff like that. So is it that, and I suppose this may be a question for you, Councillor Austin, as well, but in general for the whole room, are we suggesting that any councillor in the interim can request a minuted vote and a noting down of which of the numbers, or is it that request would have to be then voted on by everyone in the chamber for it then to be carried? Do you see what I mean? Because I'm a bit worried that on the one hand we're just going to have a new procedure for something we already do, which is calling for a recorded vote, which admittedly is quite long in itself, or the other way, we could have meetings that probably run out of time because you could have the same councillor requesting a minuted vote on everything, and them having to then be carried out just to, you know, delay the meetings, if you see what I mean. I feel like we're getting ourselves into a situation where we're going to create more problems than solve things.
So, yeah, it would be that if it would work very similar to the way that recorded vote would work. So you would have a member that says, I propose that we have a minuted numbered vote, or whatever you want, a counted vote, whatever you want to call it. And then somebody would need to second that, and then the same way that it works with a recorded vote is that over half the councillors in the room would need, half the councillors who are a member of the panel would need to agree it. Sorry. Yeah. So that's designed so you couldn't have 2 people voting for it, 1 person voting against, and then 8 people abstaining. That wouldn't be acceptable, because it would have to be over half the number of people that were at the meeting.
Councillor Crittenden.
Yeah, I just want, actually, this is really a question for my colleague, Councillor Austin, more than anything else, because she's representing Councillor Garner, who put this on the agenda. I've got a feeling that this actually came out of Planning Committee, because when I took over as chair of Planning Committee, quite early on, I was asked if on the minutes I would be recording the number of people that voted for or against. And in reality, the reason I was being asked to do that was because the journalists who weren't in the meeting wanted to know if it was a unanimous or a majority vote. And we checked it out, and it came back that actually, no, we couldn't put into the minutes that this was the number, like 7 to 8 or whatever. And so I'm not quite sure how we're talking about making this a change for full council, when it, or for all of them, when we also have coming up about the need to change the constitution, because we can't run our committees the same way as we run full council, because that we Nick and I have discussed that already, and I know that's coming up. So I'm just wondering whether or not we can still go back to the suggestion this is deferred, because this is really something that's come out of a committee rather than something that's going to affect full council. And is it a problem for full council? I suppose go back to my first question, is this a problem for full council?
Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, Chair, I think we're going to go round and round. Under 16.1I of the Constitution, I would move a motion that the question is now put. So we go to a vote.
Thank you.
Otherwise, we're just going round and round.
I totally agree with you. So, the proposal is that we defer what we've got until the Star Chamber budget is approved. And we've got a proposer, Councillor Crittenden. Is there a seconder? Councillor Yates?
Just point of order, I think your wording is to defer until the Star Chamber is approved. That's an assumption that will be approved, I think, till the Star Chamber process.
Yeah.
Because if it's not approved,
Yeah.
we might want to discuss other options.
Well, just to, all right, just to defer it. Yeah. We got a seconder? Councillor Pugh. All those in favour? And those against? Any abstentions? Right. Now we can get on to agenda item 6. And believe it or not, I call on you again, Nick, to open the batting.
I say the work programme is set out. Yeah, you'll notice that the speech length item was moved from this meeting to the September meeting. Apologies about that. There was some difficulty in collating the evidence. But we obviously had as previously mentioned, Councillor Fellows raised about length of the 30-minute time limit for questions, so we can add that in at some point. When would if I ask members when would you like it, you're all going to say the next meeting, aren't you? Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's a fair point. That is a fair point. I think we've gone past the item now, but no, we can certainly put it on we'll put it on the work programme for the 24th of September meeting. There's plenty of time between now and then.
Can I just say, I think the date has been agreed, it's the 12th of November, from what the email was I got today. Yeah. So that November one is the 12th of November. Mine shows blank. Councillor Scobie.
Just going to ask, can we look at extending the time for questions without that impacting other parts of the Constitution around the length of meetings? Because I'm assuming that the reason it's 30 minutes is because if you add the two sets of questions up, motions, petitions and the leader's speech, it probably goes very close to the legally allowed time for a meeting. So what time can we go to? Is it 11? Then it's got to be deferred and then picked up the following day or at the reserve date.
My favourite constitutional bit, which is at 10:30, you need to have a vote to see whether or not members feel that the remaining business on the agenda can be completed by 11 o'clock. If you think you can carry on till 11 o'clock. But if you haven't finished the business by 11, then the meeting finishes at 11 o'clock. And as you say, you come back the following Monday evening. Yeah.
If I can just respond, I completely support Councillor Fellows wanting to discuss this. Maybe we could, to make sure we can have a full debate, include length of council meetings on there as well, because what I don't want is we go have a discussion about it and say, oh yeah, we think we should change it to 45 minutes. You can't do that because of council rule other one that isn't on the agenda. So I should suggest both of them should be on.
Councillor Pugh?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo what Councillor Scobie says, and particularly Councillor Fellows. I think in my time as a councillor, and there are members in the chamber that have been councillors on and off for longer than I have, I can't remember us ever really getting close to 10 o'clock, let alone 10:30 or 11 o'clock. I mean, I think once we got to about 9:45, maybe 9:30. I'm thinking, I think that it is something we really need to discuss, because particularly as Councillor Fellows said earlier, and we've all really agreed, we've got rid of the September full council meeting because of a lack of business. That was voted on, I think, last year, and that's absolutely fine. But of course, we've now got less full council meetings across a calendar year, so there's less opportunity for us and members of the public to ask questions, for us to put motions forward, and if we're able to extend the time, I just think, it won't always be used, but I think it's just important, really.
As you've raised it, I'm going to indulge the meeting by repeating my favourite council anecdote, which is that a council not too far from here, their constitution doesn't say the following Monday, theirs says the next day, and there was a planning meeting, and they got to 11 o'clock, and their chair insisted that the meeting be adjourned to the following day, and then kept everybody there until 1 minute past midnight, and then carried on straight away afterwards. Yeah. I would suggest not making that change to the constitution. But
Thank you for that, Nick. So, looking at the recommendation that the committee note the content of the report, and secondly, the committee either agrees the topics proposed for its consideration during the following year, or it proposes amendments to those suggested topics, and or the order it's proposed the committee consider these topics. I think it's safe to say that we want the time of meetings added to the September meeting, and I think that's about the only topic we're considering changing.
And enough time for
questions, yeah.
And questions, yeah.
both of them are linked.
Yeah. Councillor Austin?
This is probably going to be regarded as irrelevant, but I have asked in the past about changing slightly the way that we minute various meetings. I talked to the leader about it. He told me to bring it to this group. I brought it to this group. I think your response was, that's not actually in the Constitution, so it doesn't sit with this group. Can somebody just advise me how to progress that request? Because there doesn't seem to be a mechanism by which we can suggest it. It's a very minor change about the way that different sorts of meetings are minuted.
Do you want to make contact with me, email me, and we can have a discussion, and we'll talk to Nick. Thanks.
Councillor Crittenden?
Just to clarify, if we're discussing length of times, motions as well, because I think it's Chair's discretion, we can keep running over time, but, we have had some very interesting discussions that have gone on and have needed to go on, but if we're going to review length of time, then we might as well do them all.
Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, I'd just like to completely agree with that. I think, we need to look at this in the round about how all these pieces fit together. And I'm absolutely not of the view that we should increase everything. I mean, everybody probably knows from now that I love a good meeting, so I'd quite happily stay as late as needed. But, more is not necessarily best. But I will sort of agree that we should look at them in the round. So motions, petitions, and I think petitions is due to be on. Is it November anyway?
November.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can look at them in the round.
So we've got motions already on for the 24th of September, and obviously petitions for the 12th of November.
Sorry, Chair. Shall we amalgamate so that they're all in the same meeting, maybe in the September meeting, just to get it done? I just think they're all interconnected, really, aren't they? Petitions, motions, and questions. The time limit for all of them, and they all go one after the other in the agenda for a full council meeting.
I wouldn't want to keep you after midnight. Do you want to remove one from the September meeting to the November meeting?
Can I make a slight change on that then?
Yes, Councillor Scobie.
If the majority of this stuff's going to be picked up in November, let's do November, because I think the thing about petitions was very different. It was about the process of how petitions are gathered, how many numbers there are, and where it goes after that, because there's some issues. I raised this at the last meeting, because I was just concerned that if a petition is brought in, say, the end of May, it has to wait till potentially September sometimes, or if it came in at the right point, it could have to wait like 3 or 4 months, and it's what the response looks like. So maybe we could look at petitions in September, the actual process, and then all the other way round.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I say, if we separate out, because motions again is about the process, similarly to the petitions thing. So if you want us to do an all-encompassing report on the length of the different individual parts of the meeting, I would suggest that we do that at the September meeting and then push the motions, how it actually works, to the following meeting, if that's okay with members.
Do we all agree? Councillor Crittenden?
I was just going to say, I noticed that joint leaders of political groups is in bold for September, but is that worth moving down into November if we're going to have longer?
I've just asked the same question.
It won't take, I know it's famous last words, but it won't take us very long to write the report. I'll rephrase it like that. Yes.
We've already got speech lengths including chair's discretion, so that we're rounding that out, and then we do the debate, so it's about lengths of everything rounded out, motions, clarification of process. That will be a nice meeting, and then bump over the joint leaders.
So correct me if I'm wrong. So in September we're going to have motions, petitions and the joint leaders of political groups? And what about the speech length? Is that going to be involved in motions?
So September will be an all-encompassing report covering the length of each of the constituent parts of the council meeting. That's one item. Then we'll have the joint leaders of political groups, because that won't take us very long to do the report for that. That's fine. And then the speech lengths bit we can bring back to the same meeting, because I think actually that's quite helpful with regards to the speech lengths, because obviously if you expand the amount of speech lengths or shorten them, that's going to have a major effect on the...
Can I just clarify, was that what that was about? I thought that was related to committees and speaking on committees. Maybe I've got the wrong end of the stick on that one.
Are you using the words chair's discretion?
I don't remember from the last meeting adding that we were going to discuss speech length, but I may have missed that bit.
No, I think I think actually, to be fair, it's worth separating that out as well, because I think it goes back to the point that Councillor Crittenden was making, which is that's what you've talked about is part of the separation of the rules for full council and the separation of the rules for everything else that we do. And that's like the frequency of the number of times people can speak in a debate and those sorts of things, where theoretically you're only allowed to speak once. So it's about identifying which of the rules in the Constitution that apply to full council only and which don't.
Yeah, because that's a big topic. That's the one that, because that's basically at the moment the Constitution doesn't say anything about what rules apply at committees. So the assumption is that effectively full council debate rules apply. And I think it's very much the view of the committee that we don't want that rule, but trying to set up something different is going to be complicated and big, and that probably needs a meeting effectively by itself.
Yeah.
So do you want to clarify the full content of the next meeting, Mr. Hughes, before we propose and second it?
So it's a all-encompassing report across the times of all of the different elements of the council meeting, the joint leaders of political groups, and that speech lengths for actual lengths of speeches. It's mainly to do with the fact that when you introduce a motion or some items, some members get more time to introduce the same item than other members do based upon what job they have. So it's looking as that, is that fair, or is it actually, should everybody get the same amount of time to put a motion in? That's what that specific speech length item's about.
So I think we've clarified now what's going to go on at the next meeting. Can I have a proposer, please? Proposer Scobie, a seconder? Agreed?
Agreed.
Not voted on. Okay.
Super. Affirmation of the meeting.
The affirmation
Yeah.
of the meeting, yeah. That concludes the meeting. Members, thank you very much for attending. 8:20.